Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Saturday morning, and the Kentucky Wildcats continue to stay aggressive in the transfer portal, landing the commitment from former four-star wide receiver Raymond Cottrell from the Texas A&M Aggies going into his second year of college football. There's a lot to like about what Raymond Cottrell brings to the table. A couple things I have in my notes going back and watching the high school film. This is a big, fast, fluid mover. And the reason I say fluid movers, you see the size, right? 6'3", 215. You go check out the track times, an 11.14 in the 100-meter dash time, which is blazing for a kid his size. And then you look at the film, he's a very fluid route runner, can create separation in his route trees. And what I like maybe the most about what Raymond Cottrell brings to the table, he's extremely good after the catch. He can make people miss. He's a load for defensive backs to bring down. This is another weapon for the Kentucky Wildcats to work with as they usher in the Brock Vandagriff era. Really exciting playmaker. Going to talk a little Raymond Cottrell. Then I want to talk about a few other transfer portal targets for Kentucky that are visiting the Wildcats this weekend. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys and a shout out to the Kentucky fans. This is a team we just talked about in terms of Brock Vandagriff committing to Kentucky, and the amount of support you guys showed, it was amazing. Cannot thank you guys enough. I love doing this, but the reason I get to do this is because of all the support. So if y'all do enjoy the content, you enjoy the updates, consider subscribing to the channel. I have a feeling we're going to be talking a lot of Kentucky the next couple of weeks as Mark Stoops is clearly getting aggressive in the transfer portal. And without further ado, let's get into Raymond Cottrell. And I think we can just turn on the film from his high school. This is a kid that's only 1 year removed from high school football, and you go check out what he brings to the table. I mean, there's a lot to like, and I think what I like the most is you're looking at a guy who's 6'3" and is going to run some really clean routes, create separation. Then when he gets the football in space, he is a load to bring down. You're going to see a nasty stiff arm, put that guy in the dirt, and he's extremely good at changing direction, making people miss. So when you combine all those factors, 6'3", 215 pounds, he's a very good mover in terms of changing direction. Those are the things that you want to see in your wide receiver. And when it is time to turn on the jets, he is outrunning most defensive backs to the end zone. You look at this wide receiver room for Kentucky. Barian Brown, Dane Key, Shamar Porter takes his name off the transfer portal, so he's coming back to Kentucky. Now you add a guy like Raymond Cottrell. There are a lot of weapons within this Kentucky offense that Brock Vandagriff is going to have to work with, and we talked about it. I think there's some meat on the bone in terms of the quarterback play. The Devin Leary era didn't totally work out, and the wide receiver play probably took a step back as well. But you're looking at this offense heading into 2024 with the young talent that they have at wide receiver, bringing in former five-star quarterback Brock Vandagriff. This is an offense that I think Liam Cohen is going to have a blast scheming up because the personnel, the playmakers that are at his disposal are massive. Now, I want to talk about a few other guys that the Kentucky Wildcats are targeting in the transfer portal. And then go back to another wide receiver that it sounds like Kentucky probably is in the inside track for. And this is a guy in Jamori Macklin that has offers from most Power 5 schools across the country. Extremely productive coming out of North Texas. He started his career at Missouri. He's the, I believe, cousin of Jeremy Macklin, if y'all remember him at Missouri. He goes to North Texas. You take a look at the 2023 numbers, 57 catches, 1,000 yards, 11 touchdowns, extremely productive. You take a look at the film. This is a very polished wide receiver that's played a lot of college football. If you add Jamori Macklin into this wide receiver room, you're looking at kind of a wide receiver core that I do think is one of the better wide receiver groups in the SEC. And if many of you guys have been listening for the last 6 months heading into this season, I said this Kentucky wide receiver room with Dane Key, Barian Brown, and Travion Robinson was probably one of the more talented wide receiver groups that you saw in the SEC. And I don't necessarily think that passing attack fully lived up to its potential. You bring in Brock Vandagriff. You get those two back in Dane Key and Barian Brown. And then you bring in a guy like Raymond Cottrell and potentially Jamori Macklin. That's what's really getting you excited if you're a Kentucky fan heading into 2024. Another guy that I think is really interesting, and as a Michigan fan, I know this player quite well. That's Chip Trayanum. And we talked about, a couple days ago when we said Brock Vandagriff, we were saying that a running back might need to get added to this roster. And I think we offered Trayshawn Ward from Kansas State. It sounds like Chip Trayanum is the guy that the Kentucky Wildcats are going to be going after. Big fan of Chip Trayanum. If you guys remember Chris Rodriguez for Kentucky, that's who he kind of reminds me of. I mean, 230 pounds, extremely hard runner. This is a no-nonsense runner. I mean, we're getting downhill, we're inviting contact, and we're falling forward. That's kind of the bones of what Chris Rodriguez was for this Kentucky offense. And man, was he good in this Kentucky offense. That's the kind of the physicality and the downhill nature Kentucky wants in their run game. Story around Chip Trayanum, goes to Arizona State, transfers to Ohio State, and it was a lot of talented backs in that Ohio State room, but Chip Trayanum got a lot of burn going back to this year. I mean, it's a guy that's run for over 1,100 yards, 5.1 yards per carry in a really crowded Ohio State backfield. But what they would use with Chip Trayanum that no other running back in that room could give is that physical nature, that running back that could get up that hard yard and run downhill and hit the hole extremely hard and be physical and inviting contact. Chip Trayanum's that kind of guy. He's from Akron, Ohio. That is the wheelhouse of Coach Stoops in terms of bringing in guys from the state of Ohio. This is a Kentucky running back, and this one makes a ton of sense in terms of what Kentucky wants to do. He's going to be visiting Kentucky. I think he's going to be a guy that's probably garnering a decent amount of Power 5 interest, so this might take a couple weeks as he's going to have some other offers to take a look at. You talk about a match made in heaven, though. I think Chip Trayanum certainly makes a lot of sense. The last guy I want to talk about that's emerging on the offensive line, those are the two positions we kind of talked about, right? We wanted to add a running back, and we wanted to add some depth and talent to this offensive line. And Drew Azzopardi, another guy that's getting a ton of Power 5 interest, especially out on the West Coast. He's from California, played his football at San Diego State for his first 2 years, 6'7", 315. I mean, that is the type of offensive tackle you build in a lab. You want a prototypical offensive tackle. That's the kind of body that you want. And he's a really good athlete, especially in pass protection. I mean, on 185 pass pro sets, only gave up 7 pressures. That San Diego State team really was not great on offense, but they could run the football, and they had a solid offensive line. And Drew was part of that group on that offensive line. This would be a nice addition that we kind of talked about. I think this Kentucky offensive line took some really good steps from 2022 to 2023, and they're looking to kind of continue taking those steps into 2024 and kind of get that big blue wall culture back at Kentucky. When Kentucky's playing their best football, they are dominating the line of scrimmage. I think the last 2 years, you talk about maybe why Kentucky took a little bit of a dip. I think the offensive line play just wasn't quite where it needs to be for Kentucky to be that competitive in the SEC. You add a guy like Drew, and you get this offensive line revamped, and you look at the wide receivers coming in. You look at Brock Vandagriff coming in at quarterback. Kentucky's starting to check a lot of boxes on the offensive side of the football. And it sounds like Mark Stoops is going to be getting aggressive in the transfer portal. So we're going to see some other names that are going to be popping up over the next couple of weeks. We'll keep you guys updated. Want to hop on, though, and talk a little Raymond Cottrell. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.